Hello and welcome to the second episode of DIPLOMATA. I'm Francis Sune. Since its first mission in 1999, the UN has continued to play a vital role in helping Timor-Leste grow as a nation. So what is that role the UN system is playing today? How does it help Timor-Leste grow as a nation? Joining me in this episode is Mr. Roy Trivedi, the United Nations System Resident Coordinator since 2018. Thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this program. To start with, would you please share with us your history, your background? What brought you to UN?
Okay, that's a great question, Francis. Thanks for asking that. Let me say, I'll start by saying, look, I am born in Kenya, moved when I was about 9-10 years old, moved to the UK with my family, and I did my studies and so on in the UK. And I studied law, and then after that, I worked for a few years in the UK. But I always wanted to go and work overseas because I'd been born overseas. I'd seen some of the struggles that ordinary people in Kenya had, the way in which they were trying to improve their lives, and that's what I wanted to do. And so after a few years of working in the UK, I went back to university, did 2 years, a master's course in development studies, and then I got my first job overseas, which was working in a buffalo milk cooperative in India, in a very remote part of India, where I was there to support a small project working with tribal women. I did that for about a year and then went back to the UK. And when I went back to the UK, I'd worked in quite a remote place where really I had one bicycle and 17 villages that I had to cover. So every morning the women would collect milk from the buffaloes and then gradually pay back the loan that they had borrowed from government to be able to buy a buffalo. And then gradually through the milk yields and the money that they earned, they would have an asset, which would be the buffalo. So when I finished that, which was an amazing job, I then got a job working with Oxfam in Malawi. And I had visited that country a few times because one of my sisters had been working there. And I got this job working with Oxfam where I was asked to coordinate some research with 6 people living in villages through the rainy period and so on season. And then we wrote up the research, and we were asked to recommend to Oxfam what it should be doing in the country of Malawi in Africa. So that was another great job. And then from there I worked in Oxfam in their headquarters for a few years on policy issues. I then moved to the UK Labour Party, where I was working on international development. And then I did that until 1993, and then worked for 4 years initially back in India as the Save the Children representative for India, and later for Save the Children in Mozambique for another 4 years. And meantime, that was by 1999-2000, there had been a change in government in the UK, and I had worked for the Labour Party, and Labour were then in government. So I was asked by the minister to come back and work in her department. So I actually did that. So then I worked for 13 years working for the UK government, and eventually was a senior civil servant in the UK government. And then there was an advertisement for anybody who was interested to come and work for the United Nations. So I went through various tests internally. It was a competitive process in the UK government, and then a competitive process with people from outside. And eventually I got a ticket, an offer to go and work for the UN but I didn't have a position which country to go to. And eventually I met Helen Clark, who was then the head of UNDP, who was visiting London, and I spoke to Helen and I said, Helen, look, I'm willing to go and work in a difficult place, but I need to find that position quite quickly, and I was selected to go and work in Papua New Guinea. So I didn't know very much about Papua New Guinea, but I worked there for 4 years and had a fantastic time with the United Nations, really doing what I think is really useful work for the country and so on. And when I finished there, I was still on secondment from the UK government. But at that stage, I then had to make a decision whether I continue with the United Nations or go back into the UK government. And I decided that I could do more good in the United Nations system. And fortunately for me, I was allocated the position of resident representative coordinator for the UN in Timor Leste. So I started here a year ago, and I have to say it's a very special place and one that I'm really enjoying.
Your decision to work in difficult places, is that because you had experience working in places like Kenya, Malawi, and remote areas in the UK? Is that the reason?
Yeah, Francis, I worked in, as I said, Malawi, India, Mozambique, Tanzania, Central Asia, Papua New Guinea, Timor Leste, and I think my decisions to work in what might be regarded as difficult places is to do with my upbringing, to do with the way I was brought up by my family and what I saw happening in the world. And that has been, actually I'm really lucky that I tell young people throughout the world that if you choose a career that you love, something that you really love, then you never feel like it's work. You feel that you're actually enjoying yourself and achieving things both for yourself but also contributing to a better world.
What have been the highlights, your unforgettable moments working with all these various organizations, with the government, especially with the UN?
Yeah, highlights, I mean, I'm really lucky, okay? One of the things that I say to everybody is that wherever you serve, whichever country you're working in, whichever place you're working in, you have to really find things that you love about the place and so on. And I've been very fortunate in my career that literally every country that I've served in, I found something that I love about the country. So in the United Nations system, this is my second posting after Papua New Guinea. And I actually loved Papua New Guinea because of a whole range of things, seeing the resilience of people. Finding that literally every day you would come to work and there would be things that you would never expect to happen. Sometimes really great things, sometimes bad things, and you have to find ways around those. And I also love the biodiversity, the animal life, and so on in Papua New Guinea. In Timor-Leste, what I really love is firstly people, the smile of the people, the culture of Timor-Leste, my colleagues and friends, our partners that we work with. Being a United Nations resident coordinator is a really great position because you meet people at all levels of society. You meet people in villages who are perhaps struggling with water and sanitation or education or healthcare. And you meet with political leaders, and you meet with senior representatives in governments and non-governmental organizations and so on. And you know, it's part of my job is to find ways of working with all of those different people to make a difference in people's lives, to really improve, help the country to achieve what it wants to achieve for its people, which is safer, secure place, a place where people can live with dignity, where human rights can be protected, where people can feel that they are working and also growing as human beings and contributing to a better world. And I think that's the lovely thing about my position.
What are the biggest lessons you have learned from your international experience that you can take to Timor-Leste and use it or apply it maybe in your work in Timor-Leste?
It's a really amazingly profound question, because it's a very deep question. And if I look through my career, which has been over 30 years, there are some very basic things that I've learned. The first is, wherever you go, try and find out and understand what is happening in that society and where you can make a difference to improve people's lives. Second thing is, find people and work with people that want to achieve good things. So try and build partnerships, work with people, try and find ways of both serving people but also making sure that the country keeps moving forward and achieving what it wants to achieve for its people. And then finally, and this is perhaps a more something that I learned, but particularly from my experience in Africa and India, was people actually are the same all over the world. Everybody, when you are a father or a mother, you want your children to do better than you. You want people around you, you want to achieve what you would like to achieve, but you also want your future generations to do better. And I think being aware of people's circumstances, whether they are male, female, able-bodied or disabled, or regardless of who they are, where they are, finding ways of giving them hope, aspirations, and actually working with them to help them achieve what they want to achieve is what I've learned.
With your work with the UN, what do you find unique about the UN's work?
The UN has, of course, a unique role. It is an organization that was born after the Second World War, and it was born out of a very difficult situation after the war and so on. And now if we look at the major challenges across the world, all of those challenges are challenges that not one country or one institution can solve. It has to be what we call multilateral solutions. People working across geographical, national boundaries, institutional boundaries, and so on. And the unique thing about the UN is that as the United Nations, you are able to bring people and work with them. The UN is not a perfect organization. We also need to keep improving, keep getting smarter about the way we work, delivering better, and so on. But in Timor-Leste, the UN has a very long, I think, very important history. It is an institution that has contributed, I think, very significantly to independence in this country and to the development of the country. And what we need to do is to continue to be relevant for people's lives here, to continue to work with people in Timor-Leste so that Timor-Leste achieves what it wants to achieve and also contributes through the 17 sustainable goals that the country has signed up with other nations in the world to try and achieve by the year 2030.
I understand you work with a lot of Timorese staff in Timor-Leste. How have you found working with your Timorese counterparts since your posting in Timor?
Yeah, I found Timorese staff and colleagues very open to learning, open to trying new things and doing things better, but also very proud, and which is good, I think. Right? Proud of their culture, proud of their traditions, and what one really nice thing about my Timorese staff is they will tell you if they think certain things won't work. So they will say, look, we've tried this, maybe this won't work here or whatever, and I find that really good. But the really unique thing about our Timorese staff is that they are all 100% committed to serving this country. And I think unless you have that in a country, it's very hard for people from outside to bring about change. It has to the change has to come from people in the country. Our job as outsiders is to try and facilitate that, to bring in ideas, use the global network that the UN has, the knowledge networks and so on, bring in good ideas, but then try and work with Timorese staff, Timorese colleagues who can really embrace those things and then make them work for Timor-Leste.
With Timor-Leste, have you been able to visit places outside of Dili?
Yes, I have. So I've been here now 10 months, and so far I've visited probably about most of the municipalities. I think there are 5, 6 that I've yet to visit. But you know, those are short visits, and my period, normally the length of service is 4 years, 4 to 5 years. And my intention is try to get out every single month. I make sure that I go outside of Dili and I try to meet with people in different places and so on. So there are many people that I've met already and many that I would like to continue to meet in future, where I hope to go still. And what's unique about Timor-Leste again is that, you know, every single municipality has slightly different contexts, slightly different challenges, slightly different opportunities and so on. And if as a country we can build on those opportunities and grasp those opportunities, then I think that the whole country will start to progress faster than it has been doing.
And just to sum up, what is your average day in Timor?
Right. So I'm going to shock you perhaps a little bit. I wake up most days at 4:30 in the morning, and I wake up and I do an hour and 20 minutes of meditation. So that's my first thing. I do that, and then I go normally for a bicycle ride or a run or something for about 20 minutes or half an hour. And then I come back, I have my shower and so on, and my breakfast, and I start my work at about 8:15 in the office. And most days in the office I will have a combination of meetings outside the office, meetings with UN staff, perhaps doing some meetings with civil society organizations or with government and so on. And those will last till maybe 5, 6 in the evening. Normally there are occasionally probably twice or 3 times a week. There may be evening events as well, so I might do those. Sometimes as the United Nations headquarters is in New York, or our regional headquarters in Bangkok or whatever. So often there are meetings in the evenings that I have to attend, video conferences and so on. So by about 9:30 in the evening, normally I'm ready to go to bed unless I have a video conference or whatever. So last night I was on a video conference till about 10:30, but it varies. But I also enjoy a lot of sport. I enjoy my weekends. I enjoy my family. I have a family with a wife and 3 children, and I spend quite a lot of time with them as well, talking to them. My children are overseas, but my wife is here, and she's also working in a voluntary basis with disabled people with disabilities in Timor-Leste, and really enjoying that. And both of us are learning Tetun, and so that's another thing which I also like to do.
Thank you for staying with us on Diplomata. Throughout the next 50 minutes or so, I'll be talking to Mr. Roy about the work, the programs, the assistance and cooperations involving the United Nations system in Timor-Leste. Mr. Roy, what are the United Nations system's priorities in Timor-Leste?
Our priorities in Timor-Leste are primarily 4 major things that we're doing. The first is working with government and with other partners to improve services, the quality of services. So if we think about education, how can we improve both access, having more people accessing education, but also improve the quality of education. Secondly, on that would be things like health services and water and sanitation. What are the things that the UN system can do to work with others to really improve the quality of services for all people throughout the country. Second thing that we're doing is looking at the way in which infrastructure and growth can benefit people, whether it's roads, whether it's through work which is going on building of schools or building of health centers, health posts and so on. How can we ensure that more people have access to these things, that we have good maintenance of these facilities, and those facilities really work to benefit everybody and help create jobs in the country and new opportunities in the country. Third thing that we do is we work on a range of things to improve inclusion of all people. If we think about, 50% of our population in the country are women. Many people also have disabilities, people who live in remote areas or with long-term sickness or whatever. How can we make sure that every single person, every single citizen benefits in some way and are not excluded? And in that we would include our work on human rights, promoting good human rights. So we work with the Provedora and her team, but with also others to try and promote good human rights practices in the country. And we work very closely, of course, with government in that. And then the final thing is around preventing disasters, improving the environment, and thinking about things like climate change. What can we do now to prepare for what we know will be future challenges that will become more difficult for the country? So what are the things that we can do on things like improving resilience of people to be able to cope with different type of disasters, so that if a disaster strikes, people will know what to do now? What can we do to try and make sure that as climate becomes more erratic, when we have floods or drought or whatever, that people are able to deal with their situation? And in all of that, the first around services particularly, and also the fourth, there are links between all these things, are not separate. So one of the big challenges for the UN system and for other partners in the country is to improve the nutrition in the country. We know that many people in the country don't have enough food. What can we do to improve the quality of food intake, the quality of agriculture produce, and so on? These are important challenges that the UN system is working on now.
And how do you identify those priorities?
That's a great question. There are a few different ways in which we would identify those priorities. The first is in our work with government. And the government has what it terms its Sustainable Development Plan. And we work with that to try and make sure that the targets and the things that are mentioned in that plan are actually the policy are realized. That policy is also linked to something that Timor-Leste, together with other nations in the world, have signed up for, which is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the goals are, from reducing poverty in the country, eradicating poverty, improving nutrition, reducing hunger, improving the quality of education and health services, ensuring that women and girls are properly served through all of the benefits that are provided and so on. Ensuring that we also work with the private sector to create jobs, whether it's through infrastructure, whether it's through technology, use of technology, working with universities and so on. And there are 17 goals like that which the country has signed up for. And one of the things that we're doing right now with the government is developing what is called the Voluntary National Review on Sustainable Development Goals. So these goals were started in 2015, and the government is this year taking note of how much progress has been made, what further challenges are remaining, and they've asked the United Nations system to also help with those goals. So We have 15 UN agencies working in Timor-Leste. Some are larger, some are smaller, each with its own mandate. So, for example, UNICEF works with children and schools and education. The World Health Organization works with the Health Ministry and helping to improve health systems. We have UN Women working particularly with women and girls. We have UNDP working on environment and on governance issues and so on. And we have other colleagues from the UNFPA who work on issues of health systems and improving reproductive health issues. We have Food and Agricultural Organization, which works particularly with agriculture and with fisheries departments. So each part of the UN system works with a particular group of partners, and there are also some things we do jointly. And the role of the UN Resident Coordinator is to work with each of the agencies to make sure that they are achieving the goals that they need to achieve, but that we are also together helping the country to achieve the goals that the country as a whole wants to achieve, that the government has set and that successive governments actually have set.
Apart from the government, who are you working with? The agencies you mentioned, who are they?
Yeah, so we work with a whole range of different agencies. We work with the individual line ministries of government, but we also work with non-governmental organizations. Organizations like Belum, for example, doing some amazing work on peace and promoting peace and security. We work with organizations that are working with groups working with disability, people suffering from who are disabled in some way. So we are working to support those groups. We work with Red Feto, which is working with the women's organizations, helping to mobilize women in the country to do more. We are working with youth organizations like Canua Juventude, which is working with young people who perhaps have left education, working on areas like vocational training and so on. And we work also with the churches and with smaller groups, agricultural farmers groups and so on. So we're working with a full range of people. We work with the media as well, with the Media Council. Through the elections, we saw the United Nations doing a lot of work with both the government, but also with the journalists and so on about reporting on the elections and so on. And we work with quasi-government organizations like the Provedora and so on. So we're working with a whole range of government and non-governmental, and increasingly we're also trying to work more with private sector. And this is very important because at the moment we know that jobs in most countries, the easiest way of reducing poverty in a country and helping people to improve their lives is by helping them to have jobs. And across the world, the people that create the most jobs, of course, are the private sector. So we have to find really good ways of working with them. So we have formed new partnerships with some of the private sector groups and thinking about with the chamber and so on, thinking about how do we ensure that jobs are created for the future of this country, that people are not just dependent on jobs in government, but increasingly we have entrepreneurs doing things themselves, setting up businesses, and that we're able to support them.
Before we go into further details with all of these activities, how does the United Nations system now differ? What is different between the current system with the previous missions?
So, as we were talking earlier, Francis, you know, the United Nations has a long history in this country. You know, if we think about from 99, but even before 99, several agencies were working here. This year, for example, the International Labour Organization is having its 100th anniversary. So it's 100 years, not just in Timor-Leste, but across the world, of course. So each agency has been working here, and the UN system has been working in the first period to support the peace process and the transitional arrangements to the formation of government post-independence. And then up until 2011, 2012, we had a UN mission, supporting peace building and supporting the transitional government arrangements. And then after that, what has changed, particularly in the last few years, is that we have increasingly moved into supporting the government's development, environment, human rights priorities, and so on. So increasingly, we are working closely with the government. You know, governments across the world are also part of international system. We see ourselves not as donors in this country. We are not a donor. We are a partner because Timor-Leste is actually a member state of the United Nations, and we are here to serve the government and the people of the country to achieve what the people in this country want to achieve. And people across the world want pretty much the same things. People want security, they want peace, they want growth and development, they want jobs, people want education and good services, and these are the things that we also must strive for. And Timor-Leste has achieved a lot in the last 20 years, but I think all of us know that we want to achieve more, because this country we want to ensure has a really bright future, and there are many good things to build on.
How does your work fit into Timor-Leste's own national strategic development plan? How does the UN system fit into that?
All of the priorities that we are working on are actually drawn from the Strategic Development Plan. The Strategic Development Plan, from there, actually the priorities for improved health, education, water and sanitation, those are big priorities in the Strategic Development Plans. Creating jobs and ensuring decentralization so that all parts of the country start to really improve and so on. So our priorities are drawn very much from there, but the government is also a signatory to a number of international conventions and also to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals, this started in 2015, but actually before that we had what was called the Millennium Development Goals. And the 8 goals that were agreed in the year 2000 by global leaders, including in Timor-Leste, then continued after 2015, the year 2015, and have been elaborated further. And so these are the priorities that the UN system and other development partners actually are all supporting Timor-Leste to achieve. And those goals will run until the year 2030, and we want to make sure that Timor-Leste achieves as much as possible for its people in line with those goals, because we know that if countries don't achieve those goals, we will have a more insecure world, a world in which will be more turmoil and more difficulties.
We would very much love to hear about the success stories of the programs, the cooperations. But before that, do you face any challenges in working with all these partners, if I may call them, with the government, with the civil society groups, with the private sector that you mentioned?
Yeah. Look, I think, if we didn't face challenges, then, we wouldn't be here in a way. So yes, there are definitely challenges. And the first challenge is a very simple one. We don't actually have sufficient resources all the time to meet all of the things that the country wants to achieve. If you think about it, the country's, the orçamento nacional, the budget for the country is limited. So each government has to make difficult choices about how you invest your resources. And it's the same for the UN system. We don't have, unlimited resources, so we also have to make choices. Do we invest more of our time and resources to improve health? Do we invest more on education or on water and sanitation or on creating jobs? And each time we are having to make difficult choices ourselves. So the first is definitely the challenges around resources. A second challenge in Timor-Leste is, of course, we want to improve the capacity of people, of institutions, national institutions, to be able to do things and to follow up policies the country has many good policies, but we know that the challenge is to translate policy into action. And so that's another big challenge for everybody, every single development partner, every part of government, every national organization and international organization as well. So that's another set of challenges. And the third is that, the world is changing very rapidly. Timor-Leste, people of Timor-Leste are also competing in a globalized world for, to try and have better investment in the country, to bring the best technology in the country, to have the best skills and resources and jobs for the country. And to be able to attract those things, those are also challenges that we have to work with government and with other partners, because if we really do our best and really work in a very concerted way, in a coordinated way, we can help this country to make faster progress against what it wants to achieve in its strategic development plan and the sustainable development goals.
How do you work with the international donors, the international institutions, the diplomatic corps, for instance? How do you work with them?
So we work very closely with all of the embassies that are here, and also some that are not here but supporting work. An example of that I can give you is that recently we were able to bring support, for example, from a partner that's not here all the time, which is the Government of India, and we managed to find resources through what is called the Government of India and the UN Trust Fund for supporting education work and supporting work with students in different parts of the country. We are also working very closely with the European Union, with Government of Australia, Government of New Zealand, Government of Japan and Korea, who supported a lot of the work around the elections that we did. We're working with the European Union at the moment on food security, on tackling hunger in the country, improving agricultural productivity and so on. So we have to work very closely with development partners in the country, but also constantly be looking to see what other partners are out there that we can bring. And they include, if you think about the way in which the world has changed, particularly in the last 20 years, our region of the world, Asia, has more billionaires than ever before. And it has more billionaires and trillionaires than many other parts of the world. So increasingly, if we can encourage those high net worth individuals, as they're called, to invest their resources and so on into Timor-Leste, it can complement the work that governments are doing and the multilateral system like the UN, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank and so on are doing.
Would you please share with us one or two success stories, recent success stories of the work that the UN system is doing with the partners in Timor-Leste?
Sure. So, look, just before Christmas, I was in Baucau for the 16 days of action, which are normally related to human rights and so on. And this year, the 16 days of action were focused on reducing violence against women and girls. And in Baucau, what we did was we visited a whole range of different institutions. We looked at the history of the country, what happened during the occupation and so on. We visited many of those places. We heard testimonies from old and younger women and girls about how women, girls and institutions are collaborating together to tackle the issue of violence against women. And so that was one really very practical thing. And in this year, working with the European Union and with the Korean embassy and with other embassies, we are really trying to make further progress on this issue around improving the situation on tackling violence against women and children. And that means not just working with women and children, it also means working with men and boys, because it's us as men and boys who also need to change some of our behaviors and so on. Another great success story has been, with the government of Timor-Leste, recently there has been the launch of the Zero Plastics policy. And I'm sure my colleagues will tell you about some of the things that we are looking to do now to try and support that Zero Plastics policy. And a third, of course, is the work around the elections and what happened during the elections. Look, I've worked, as I mentioned to you, I've worked in many, many countries across the world, and I have to say that the CNE, the STI, and colleagues who are working during the elections here did an absolutely fantastic job in the way that our elections were carried out, in the way in which the political parties also developed a pact to ensure that people didn't overstep certain boundaries and so on, that there was a way in which our elections were carried out, the transparency with which they were carried out and so on, I think was second to none. And I think we will hear much more about how good that is, because that actually gives people confidence that government institutions, national institutions can really do the job that Timor-Leste needs for the future. We want to see that replicated now in other areas as well, and that is what we will continue to strive for and work. And let me finish by saying, if you look across the world, Francis, you look at the challenges that the whole world is facing now. We have countries that are facing terrorism, we have countries where there's war and insecurity and so on. And what we need is more collaboration, not less. We need people to work across institutional boundaries, across geographical boundaries, and to work together. It's only by working together that the world will achieve these sustainable development goals that every country has signed up for. And that is the future. And we can't leave that just to governments. Private sector, individuals, all have to do our part. And the UN will definitely do its part in supporting the government and the people of Timor-Leste to do everything we can to achieve those goals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, welcome.
So, what do you do in the UN system?
I'm working as an ICT manager in the compound, providing ICT standard business tools to the agencies in order to enable them to work towards the implementation of SDGs in the country and the UN mandates in overall. But a part of my core business, I'm also a focal point of the premises infrastructures, especially the solar energy system. As you can see at the back here, we have most probably the biggest infrastructure of solar panel in the country. This was installed back in 2016, and we have to be very lucky and appreciate all the agencies, because this was a collective works from all the agencies led by the resident coordinator here, and this has benefited positively, not only the financial point of view, but also in terms of the environment. As we know that the UN mandate here is also accelerating the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. This installation of the solar panel is actually accelerating the goals number 7, the affordable energy, and goals number 13, working towards the climate change impact. Financially, we actually have a lot of savings compared to the previous year when we didn't have the solar panel installed. Overall, I can say that these infrastructures actually save about 40% of the electricity bills annually. In cumulative, since 2016 October, when the inception was started, it has produced about 700 million kilowatt electricity energy. That is about 45% of the energy usage in the compound. And as you can see, this is actually a shade for a car parking, but also have contributed to the saving of the energy and the electricity bills in the compound. Now, when we do this, we also contributed to the government expenses. because government actually rely on the fuel generated to power up electricity. So when we save the electricity, energy, meaning we also save the government expenses on the electricity bills, especially on the fuels. This is also a good example of UN demonstrating its support, its commitment to have the sustainable development goals in this country. And I think it's really important that all the agencies have a big commitment towards the implementation of the SDG in the country.
So how does Mr. Roy's role fit into your work?
Mr. Roy works as an ambassador. He is the current resident coordinator of the United Nations. His role is very prominent in all the agencies' work, especially in my area, in the premises and also in the ICT area, is how to keep working on the environmental issues, how to keep improving the savings in the implementation of the project, especially in the compound, so that if there are donors' funds that should go to this electricity bill, it can go directly into the beneficiary, especially towards to the people of the Timor-Leste. And his roles is very important in keep advising, approving, making the specific decisions to the provisions of the new infrastructures in order to improve the efficiency in overall in IT infrastructure, also in the solar energy infrastructures.
Could you please tell me what is your work within the UN system?
At the UN system, I'm working as the head of office of the UN Resident Coordinator, currently Mr. Roy Trivedi. So my work here in the office is to support the Resident Coordinator office, ensuring that the work of the UN system are in a collaborative and a coordinated way. Ensure that we as a UN system, we deliver together better for the development areas, whether it is in the education sector, in nutrition or health, in environment, and also on women empowerment. So these are the work that we do at the moment in the country. So currently we are also working for preparing the United Nations Development Assistance Framework evaluation. So we are in the stage of evaluation process of our 5 years program, 2015 and 2020. So we are in the stage of that evaluation, and we are hoping that the evaluation report can be finalized by first quarter of this year, and then maybe the report can also feed in as a basis for our development process or planning for the new development of the UNDAF, of our program areas for the next 5 years. And this year we are also very pleased to assist the current government in preparing and also in developing the voluntary national review of the Sustainable Development Goals that will be tabled in by the government of Timor-Leste to the UN in New York in July this year. So that's.
So what's the role of Mr. Roy in your work?
So Mr. Roy Trivedi is my supervisor. So I'm working with him. I am the head of his office, coordinating all the work of the office, supporting him on a daily basis. So I am reporting to him on a daily basis. He is my supervisor. So Mr. Roy Trivedi, he is a very passionate person. Even though he has just been here for 10 months, but he has already made, at least some changes to the UN system. We are working towards better together as the UN system from among the agencies that are based in the country. And he's also encouraging people to, especially the UN staff, to come up with new ideas and new approaches on how we can come up with better synergies, better strategic planning in order to support better the development of the country. He's a very supportive man, especially towards the capacity building of the Timorese staff and also Timorese people, in particular the youth, the Timorese youth. Recently, he has also been supporting, we are mobilizing some resources from the other agencies to support one of the Timorese youth who has been offered to participate in the Peace Boat back in New York a few months ago.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you, Mom.
What do you do in the UN system?
Well, I think as you know, the UN in Timor-Leste is working on development program as well as policy and advocacy. Myself, I work as a program manager for United Nations Development Program. It's one of the UN agencies that is currently working in Timor-Leste. As a program manager, I work with the government of Timor-Leste, development partners as well as civil societies to provide capacity building, technical assistance, as well as project implementations in the area of environment, resilience building against climate change risk and impact, as well as sustainable management of natural resources and waste. One of the examples is currently we have a technical expertise, an international one and also a national one, who is currently supporting the Secretary of State for Environment to develop a zero plastic policy for Timor-Leste.
So, what is the role of Mr. Roy, the UN Resident Coordinator, in your work?
Okay, Mr. Roy is the resident coordinator for the UN. Formerly, he was also the resident coordinator for UNDP. So he's also one of our supervisor. We work with him very closely when he was the UNDP resident representative. I remember we went, Mr. Roy and our project team went together for a field visit to Natarbora, Same, and also Manatutu. He's a very great leader who is very humble. He always encourages staff like us to continuous learning and also find ways to improve the way we work to serve the Timorese people. Of course, including us, the Timorese people who work for the UN. Personally, he's a very humble person and down to earth. I've seen him, talking to the communities, including children, elderly people in the remote areas of Natarbora. When we were there, talking to the farmers, talking to the women's group who do horticulture activities, talking to the youth who do agriculture, planting of bananas, and also to the women groups who do handicraft for their economic income.
This series of interviews with Mr. Roy Trivedi, the United Nations System Resident Coordinator, as well as with some of the staffer, have given us an insight of what the UN system is currently doing in Timor-Leste. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again in the next episode of Diplomata with another diplomat. I'm Francis Suni. Bye for now.